Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. I'm here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. More of that a bit later. But today, in the Daily Telegraph, there's an article by William Hague. Yeah, remember him? Well, of course, now, Lord Hague of Richmond, that being the Richmond in Yorkshire. And he writes a piece today where he talks about UKIP. And, well, the first few hundred words are fairly disparaging about the fact that UKIP's had a series of leaders over the last year, which of course is true. He talks about Henry Bolton and his difficulties with his current or recently ex-girlfriend. But then he gets on to the meat of the article. He says, UKIP played a big role in changing the course of British and European history, but the only way to ensure change is to make sure we stand behind ministers who are faithfully trying to execute Brexit. He goes on to say that Brexit might well depend on the Conservatives winning another election, and arguing, once Brexit's happened, arguing about its details will be academic. I'm going to come back to that. He says, therefore, UKIP should put out a statement saying, in UKIP, we have achieved our objective of voting to leave the European Union, and it's now time to formally suspend our activities. Well, I have to say, Mr. Hague, is this the same William Hague who in 2001 said, vote for me and I'll give you back your country? Eurosceptics flocking to vote for him, believing he was the man who wouldn't just keep the pound, he'd get back control of our borders and our country. Yeah, that's right, the same William Hague who then passionately argued we should vote to remain in the referendum, and is now saying that actually it's all fine, and Brexit is going to happen, so there's no need for UKIP at all. Well, as you know from last week, I am worried. The government it doesn't have a majority without the DUP in the House of Commons. Once Monsieur Barnier conniving with everybody else, and wasn't it interesting to see Chuka Umunna there yesterday with Anna Soubry in his office? Isn't it funny? They had a photograph taken with Mr. Barnier. My producer, Christian here at LBC, wanted to do a photograph of Barnier and I last week, and yet he was shuffled off behind a glass screen. I'm surprised we ever saw him again. So you can tell that Barnier is working with pro-EU forces in Britain, and so Brexit is not certain. But there's an even deeper clue in what Hague says here, when he says this: when Brexit has happened, arguing about its details will be academic. Oh, really, Mr. Hague? So arguing about continued open-door mass immigration will be, frankly, academic, will it? Arguing if we finish up paying billions every year for continued access to the single market, that will be academic, will it? And what about regulatory alignment, which we appeared to have signed up to just before Christmas, meaning we can't be competitive? What Hague wants to do here is he wants UKIP or any Eurosceptic party to disappear, because what he wants is the government to deliver Brexit in name only. So I'm asking you, does the UK still have room for a Eurosceptic party? And I think it most certainly does. You know, nothing in this political world can be taken for granted. So tell me, if you think UKIP has served its purpose, call me on 0345 6060 973. You may think, actually, UKIP's got a vital role to play because Brexit hasn't yet happened. And what about the terms? What about the fact we haven't even discussed things like immigration, in which case, text to 84850. Or maybe you think that UKIP itself has got a damaged brand reputation and a brand new Eurosceptic party needs to take its place, in which case, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch me on Facebook from inside the European Parliament here in Strasbourg and comment there too. Sally is calling from March in Cambridgeshire. Good evening, Sally.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. Very nice to talk to you for the first time.
Well, welcome on the show.
I read the article myself today. I did a visit to Waitrose, bought the paper, because I've heard you mention about the articles in there. I looked through all the headlines of the other papers, chose that one, and I no way should UKIP fade, as I've just said to the person before you, that I had to, go through. No way should it fade. It should take the credit right until the end. And I think...
Well, to be fair to William Hague, Sally, to be fair to William Hague, he does actually, you know, I mean, there's some disparaging stuff early on, but he does actually say UKIP played a big role in changing the course of British and European history. So he does pay it compliment. But, Sally, what Hague is saying to you is don't worry your little head, because Brexit's going to be just fine.
Well, it's not going to be just fine if, you know, people teeter. I mean, I was so elated when UKIP took us through all of it. I wasn't even a political person before then, and it just spoke to me. It absolutely spoke to me. You know, all the referendum and everything. I had every confidence that we were going to win the referendum. So like a feeling, it was a feeling that it gave me. And I so thought that's what our country needed. You know, that's what would make our country, if you like, great again, in my opinion.
To borrow a phrase, make Britain great again.
Great again, yes, exactly. Yeah. And I just felt it was something that was needed, so needed. I was absolutely thrilled, and I should.
And Sally, do you? So you were thrilled with all of that.
Yes.
But so do you? Is what you're saying to me that if we don't have a UKIP type presence there, the Tories could soften considerably on Brexit?
Well, I don't think they should even exist. The Tory party.
What, the Tories?
Because their heart is not in it. Their heart is not in it. It's too weighted against it. And if people had stayed with UKIP, if they'd had faith and given them the credit for what they did and followed it through, like I have all from, first discovering them, if you like. I voted for them last year. I even went to somebody's house. I didn't know anything about UKIP people or anything. I sought this person out, drove to this person. I'm a woman of 70, drove to this person's house. It was a UKIP person, just to be able to speak to him, to get a feel for the party, real life, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, Sally, I think it's interesting. The journey that you went on there, as you said, not being a political person, I think at its peak, about 25% of people who were voting for UKIP would otherwise, I don't think, have gone out and voted for anybody. So a lot of people did come in to the political system. Sally, I thank you for your story and for your passion. And Sally there saying UKIP and UKIP voters need to follow this through all the way to the end. What does Mark in Palmer's Green think? Good evening.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. We desperately need UKIP more than ever, or a Eurosceptic party more than ever, because there has to be that threat there, you know. And I've got to say, I really thought Henry Bolton. I thought, oh, fantastic! I thought this man is the right man for the job. And so I'm sort of very disappointed and sort of let down.
What are you disappointed in? Are you disappointed in his personal life? Is that what's disappointed you? Yeah. I am actually. I really did think, oh, he's the right man for the job. Fantastic! At last, we got the right leader. You know, obviously and never be anyone like you, Nigel. But I just thought, yeah, you know, we've got him. And then this happened. I just thought, oh no, please. Okay, so
we need the threat there. We need the threat there.
Right. Okay.
Without that threat, the government are just so they've got no backbone, have they? Let's face it.
Well, listen, I do rather agree with that. I think the threat needs to be there. But tell me, do you think Henry can stay on as leader and do the job?
I think it's going to be really difficult, to be absolutely honest with you. I just think the fact that we can't really have the leader of UKIP dating, you know, what they call a racist. I don't know if she is racist, but or having dated a rapist. I just don't think it doesn't.
No, hang on, let's get rid of the word rapist in there. So the fact she's 25...
Racist. Sorry, I said racist.
Yeah, right, fine, okay, yeah, please be clear about that.
Yeah.
So the fact she's 25 doesn't bother you? The fact that he's left his third wife doesn't bother you? It's the comments she's made that bother you, yeah?
I think so. I mean, it's not brilliant leaving his wife and et cetera, but it's the fact that she is So they say I'm racist. You know?
All right. No, fine. Listen, thank you for your point. Another very strong call there saying that the threat needs to be present. Pamela says UKIP needs a complete reform. We need a credible third party to compete with the big two. Sandra says Sally is right. UKIP and yourself are still essential, Nigel. Well, that's very sweet of you. Andy says Henry has ruined it. Andrew says Farage and UKIP is over. And Brexit will never happen. Well, I tell you what, old son, if Brexit's never going to happen, then either UKIP or a replacement to UKIP will be a bigger, stronger threat to the political establishment than anything you have seen yet. And as for the comment about complete reform that Pamela makes, I would say this. I really found it difficult in the last few years leading UKIP when my hands were being tied by a group of volunteers who sat on a national executive, many of whom have got no real experience of politics or business of life particularly, and yet they were the people ultimately making the big decisions in UKIP. I wanted to radically transform the party, to turn it into sort of rather like the Five Star Movement in Italy, an online party, an exciting party, a party that, held referendums internally on policy and many things like that. And I was completely unable to do it. I think whoever is the leader of UKIP needs to be able to lead and not to be held back. And I think some of the judgments that committee have made in terms of personnel, in terms of people who've been put into elected positions, have been pretty poor too. I wouldn't disagree with anyone that said UKIP needed wholesale reform. If it gets that wholesale reform, the one thing it has going for it is brand recognition. People know what it is and know what it stands for. If it's unable to reform, then I do think a new Eurosceptic party could well emerge. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. William Hague thinks UKIP should now shut up shop. It's done its job, it's succeeded in its mission because Brexit is safe and secure in the hands of Theresa May and her government. And I don't agree with him. I think, actually, if UKIP shuts up shop, if there's no Eurosceptic voice there in British politics, we're likely to finish up with the softest of all soft Brexits. In fact, what it would be, at best, is Brexit in name only. And that, I think, is at best, unless there is a voice there challenging the government. That's my view, but please tell me I've got it completely wrong. Tell me Hague is right. UKIP should shut down. There's no risk with Brexit at all. You can do that by calling 0345 60 60 973, which is exactly what Peter in Redditch has done, a first-time caller to the show. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel. Nigel, I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend your right to say it. And that's the perspective. UKIP there may be a day where you don't need UKIP. You'll be calling for the end of UKIP. We achieved everything we wanted to, but you're not at that stage now. And I think it would be unfair of anyone to say, UKIP, shut up, it's job done.
Yeah, I mean, Hague is a party loyalist, isn't he? He's a Tory party loyalist, but he's also this great Eurosceptic leaver who's turned into this great Remainer. So, Peter, in essence, you would say you disagree with UKIP and what it stands for, but in terms of political space, there is still a need of that voice.
You have a very important role to play next. I don't know if you know it. You're a great showman, and you're a great manipulator. I mean that as a compliment.
Okay. I'll take that, Peter, as a backhanded compliment, but go on.
Genuinely. But the second referendum, you say you fear it. But actually, this is the opportunity to get hard Brexit, a full Brexit. Because if I've understood a referendum correctly, I'm no expert, but my understanding of a referendum is you choose status quo or change.
That's
now,
generally the case,
status quo
yes.
at the moment is we're leaving Europe. That's status quo. So if a bad deal comes from Europe, which it likely will do, surely the referendum should say, do you want the bad deal or do you want no deal? We crash out. Surely that's the next referendum.
Well, that is, Peter, that is a possibility. I mean, there are lots of possibilities here. There are lots and lots of different permutations as to how this will go. I mean, the main reason, Peter, for saying what I said last week, as somebody who is a passionate leaver, is that I am genuinely worried that a bad deal gets rejected in the House of Commons, which forces a second referendum upon us, and I want leavers to start to argue that actually, in many ways, no deal is better than a bad deal. It's something I said all through the referendum campaign. So I'm trying, Peter, to say to Leavers, don't be complacent. Don't listen to William Hague saying it's in the bag, because it isn't necessarily. Peter, no. I don't know. I don't know, you don't know whether there's going to be a second referendum. What I do know is that if the deal that Barnier puts and agrees with May, if that is rejected by Parliament, then we have a constitutional crisis.
Yes. But the natural process of a second referendum, if you want a first referendum on deal, surely would be accept this bad deal or status quo, which is...
No.
And I see that, but I don't know, Nigel, you seem to really fear that first deal referendum, where it could give you everything you want.
It could. No, of course it could. I tell you what I think, Peter. I think that the people of this country have been through this extraordinary democratic exercise that was that referendum, a huge raising of passions on both sides of the argument. And what I find despicable is the quite deliberate way in which our political class are trying to delay, water down and reverse Brexit. And they're doing it.
The point, though, sorry to interrupt, the point, though, with the referendum is that my view is that no one ultimately knows, is our fate better entwined in Europe or not? We can both have strong opinions, but no one fundamentally knows. And so any referendum dealing with that core issue is going to reveal a 50-50 split, give or take. It's a bit like having a referendum, is there a God? Strong passion one way, strong passion the other way. Yep. But actually, it's not going to be a decisive one way or the other. It's going to fall 40-something, 50-something, however we cut it. None of us know. Yeah, I mean, we all have strong passion.
This is what's so bizarre, Peter. This is what's so bizarre about the focus on economics from many in the referendum campaign and now. Actually, you're quite right. None of us can predict what the future's going to be, whether we're in or out. It's literally impossible. We can give our best guess. We can talk about opportunities. We can talk about risks. Actually, Peter, where the argument really is on Brexit, it's a question of, and it's a very old-fashioned word, but it's sovereignty. It's democracy. It's about whether we want to govern ourselves.
You used the word earlier on, passion. And I would argue it's more about passion. And you can have sovereignty. You can feel, I want to be British. I want British identity. We want to be separate and apart. But you can also be passionate as a Remainer. It can be done. No one ever talks with passion about remaining. They always talk about economics.
No. But Peter, my observation is this. My observation, Peter, is this. I think that Leavers, your average Leaver, was a lot more passionate than your average Remainer. Because to overturn a status quo that had been in place for over 40 years took a great deal of passion. And whilst there are, Peter, some very passionate Remainers, people who believe they are Europeans, people who believe that's our future, my sense of it is a very large chunk of those who voted Remain did so because they've got a big mortgage, did so because they've got a new business, did so because they were fearful, of what Project Fear told them. Peter, great call, great thoughts. Thank you, and do call the show again. Thank you. Ryan in Bridgend is calling me. He's also a first-time caller to the show. Welcome, Ryan.
Yes, I'm a second-time caller, Nigel. I've actually spoken to you before.
Oh, well, that's an error. That's an error, and I apologise for it.
It's okay.
Okay, is William Hague right or not, Ryan?
Well, one thing I'd like to say, Nigel, is the fact that, in my opinion, what you're doing, you understand that there's been a dilemma with UKIP now since you've left, in my opinion. I'm not a UKIP supporter in any way, shape or form, but I think that it's adding to your ego in some way that you're talking about UKIP, but you're not coming out as strongly to speak against what they've said about the royal family and what this gentleman Bolton's partner has said. You should want to be as far away from them as possible. From what
Ryan, I'm not talking about UKIP. William Hague is.
Yeah, no, but
William Hague is the one. I mean, Hague is the guy. Hague is the guy who has sparked this debate tonight, which I thought was a worthy thing for us to discuss this evening.
Mm-hmm. Well, don't you think that there's things far more worthy to speak about? Talking about the NHS, talking about the crisis in the NHS, or a little tabloid that William Hague has wrote in a newspaper.
What William Hague? I mean, look. William Hague has been a big figure in British politics since at least 1997. He's held senior, offices of state, whether we're William Hague fans or not. You know, he does have a voice in this, and he's talking about, in his words, a political party that has changed the course of British and European history, and he's saying it should close down. I think that is worthy of debate, Ryan.
Yeah, well, definitely, but let's put it this way, Nigel. How many UKIP MPs are there?
No, there aren't any.
How many UKIP councillors are there?
I don't know. I don't know. A few hundred still, perhaps.
Well, very little in comparison to other parties. The reason being is that there's not a substantial amount of the electorate that vote for this party.
That's not true, Ryan. If you go back... No. Hang on. If you go back to 2013, to 2014, to 2015, a very significant portion did. Now, it may well be, Ryan, that at the last general election, a lot of people thought, do you know what, it's job done. And Theresa May was there, you know, like Britannia, saying Brexit means Brexit. But I sense, Ryan, since those days, there are more people now looking for either UKIP or another Eurosceptic party.
Well, in my opinion, I think people are understanding that there's strength in numbers when it comes to representation in the House of Commons, and without the numbers, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to make a difference. And that's why so many people voted for one party or the other. I believe that you've quoted the fact that I believe it was somewhere 80% of the vote was split between two parties. Now, that is astronomical. That is unbelievable. The two parties did...
Ryan, we have an electoral system. We have an electoral system, a first-past-the-post system that drives us towards two-party politics. That is true. However, what UKIP proved through those last few years is that even without being in the House of Commons, through all the other elections that take place in this country, and through having a voice, you can change British politics. And arguably, that was the remarkable achievement of UKIP. Ryan, I thank you. Tom says, Aaron Banks and you, Nigel, must come back with a vengeance. Do it now. Well, thank you, Tom. And I get on Twitter, it's not in the Conservative Party's interests to leave the EU fully because it will destroy the party. They need to please their donors. Well, actually, they've got donors on both sides of this argument. The one thing that I am absolutely certain of is that if we were to follow William Hague's advice, we'd be more likely to finish up with the softest of all Brexits. And I'm asked here whether what Donald Tusk has said today was turning my second referendum comments around. I think, actually, it was more to do with Tony Blair's comments. More of that, though, more of Donald Tusk, more of the European Parliament in Strasbourg in a minute. Lord Hague of Richmond says UKIP should pack its bags and go home. And I'm asking you whether there is still room in the country for UKIP or another Eurosceptic party. Or is Hague right? Is Brexit just a done deal and it's all just going to be great? Here in Strasbourg today, a bit of good news. How about that? That's pretty unusual, isn't it? A few weeks ago, you may have heard we did a fishing special. I went out on a boat from Ramsgate looking at British fishermen, fishing quotas, the fact they're throwing so many fish back into the sea, many of which die. One of the issues that came up on that trip, and we've discussed in detail and had phone-ins on, was electric pulse fishing. If you remember, this is where the Dutch boats have got permission have had permission from the European Commission to conduct this form of fishing. Interestingly, every other country in the world has banned it. And we've had reports coming into this show from Lowestoft and elsewhere of a lot of dead, burnt, scarred fish in the ocean, a huge, wasteful bycatch. Well, the European Parliament now has some powers over fisheries. For the first 15 years I was here, all it could do was talk about it. It had no power at all. Frankly, it was a waste of time. Now the European Parliament does have say. And my job is not to beg for crumbs from the table. You know, I want us to get back our territorial waters and control of it. But, and I think perhaps partly because of what we've done here on LBC and pushing out this message wider, partly because of some very dedicated fishermen from the east and southeast of our country arguing their corner, the European Parliament today has voted against pulse fishing. Now, this means they go back to the European Commission, they open a discussion, but I think from an environmental perspective, perhaps a little bit of good news from the European Parliament today. And in fact, you can see the fishing video of me being out there on the briny by going to lbc.co.uk, where we discuss this and other important fishing and environmental issues. So I was asked whether Donald Tusk had picked up my second referendum comments. Well, Donald Tusk today, President of the European Council, I sat there and listened to him, said in a speech to MEPs, if the UK government sticks to its decision to leave, Brexit will become a reality with all its negative consequences. But wasn't it, he said, David Davis, who said, if a democracy cannot change its mind, it ceases to be a democracy? Well, clearly Tusk doesn't really respect the first vote that we've had. And do remember, there is a fine tradition in this place, whether it's the Danes who are forced to vote again, the Irish who were twice forced to vote again, or the French and Dutch who voted against a European constitution and were frankly completely ignored. You know, they don't like the word no here because they're busy building a global superpower. Actually, Donald Tusk wasn't really echoing me. He was really echoing, and it's not David Davis either. Really, this is Tony Blair's point, isn't it? Blair's point is we're allowed to change our minds. Blair is part of that campaign, desperate to push a second referendum upon us. I do not want it, but I fear it may happen. We've got to get ourselves ready. We've got to be prepared. Nigel, where is UKIP? I long to see them up there fighting for Brexit. Today, I haven't heard anything from them, says David. Well, David, actually, UKIP's been all over the front pages of the newspapers the last few days. It's just that Brexit may not have been front and centre of the UKIP debate this week. Deborah is calling from Colchester. Deborah, is Hague right? Is it time for UKIP just to simply disappear?
No, it definitely is not. I wouldn't trust it as far as I could throw in, personally. UKIP has got a very strong role still, but I feel extremely disappointed and depressed. We need a strong UKIP or even an equivalent. We need someone to hold May to account. We need someone to constantly biting at her heels, you know, to fight for what the Brexit voters wanted. There's nothing there anymore. It's just all disappeared. I mean, UKIP's in the papers, but it's mostly for the wrong reasons now, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing. We need something strong again. We need you back.
Well, thank you, Deborah. That's very sweet of you. I kind of think I did my bit. I tell you what I do agree with her, Deborah. Just listen to this. I get this on Twitter. A cross-party roadshow is the answer to all the Ramonas, Nigel. Let's put them in their place once and for all. And actually, in a sense, Deborah, that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. I'm urging people from across the political spectrum and from the world of business and elsewhere who are leavers or were leavers still, and I want them to come together to show there are some really strong, powerful, positive arguments for Brexit. And UKIP would be a part of that mix.
But we haven't got a strong leader anymore, have we, really? That's where...
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, look...
You know what? I remember Stephen Wolfe once said UKIP is ungovernable without Nigel Farage, and he was 100% right, because look at the state of it now.
Well, Deborah, in the end, I found UKIP ungovernable, even with me there, with a group of amateurs sitting on an NEC making some pretty appalling decisions. Deborah, I'm certain, and I've made this point once before, and I will say it again, I do think UKIP can have a very important role over the course of the next few years, but it has to go through fundamental reform to be fit for purpose. Deborah, I thank you, and please, any of you out there can challenge what I'm saying. You know, I'm saying I think UKIP has a role if it reforms. If it doesn't reform, I think something will come along and replace it. But please, if you think I'm wrong, if you think Hague is right, if you think there is no need to have UKIP or any Eurosceptic party, then of course challenge that on 0345 60 60 973. And Jim is calling from Skegness. Good evening, Jim.
Evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm fine, Jim. Now, Skegness was a part of the world in which UKIP, I think in the European elections, got nearly 40% of the vote, didn't they?
Yes, yeah, and the highest, I believe, the highest Brexit vote in the country, if not one of the highest, anyway, certainly.
Yeah, well up there, Jim, absolutely. Yeah. And are you a Brexit supporter, Jim?
No, I'll be perfectly honest with you, Nigel. I didn't vote in the referendum. I didn't vote either way. I had my reasons for that. I found it difficult to get particularly passionate one way or the other about it. I thought there were too many unknowns. I felt it'd be a little bit irresponsible for me to vote completely in the dark. What would the effects on free movement be? What would the effects on the economy really be? What would happen with the common market? There were so many unknowns. It'd be like me saying to you, well, I'll offer you a job, Nigel. You leave your job at LBC, come work for me, without telling you what the job was or where it was based or what the salary was going to be. So I've no.
I get the point, right?
Yeah. So I've no axe to grind. But what I would say is that I think there is definitely room for UKIP to continue. Initially, I didn't think so. We voted for Brexit, and I thought, well, that's it. UKIP's done its job now. But actually, the more
that's actually what most UKIP voters thought too, wasn't it?
It seems to be, yeah, because the vote seems to have evaporated, doesn't it? But actually, you know what? The more I think about it, we need voices from every side of every debate. We need pro-Europe voices. We need Eurosceptic voices. You need a parliament, or at least the potential for a parliament, which has all these differing views. Because if all the political parties are going to broadly be the same, we might as well just pick 650 names out of the phone book at random to run the country.
Well, do you know what, Jim? Do you know what, Jim? And we're not discussing this tonight, but it's actually quite difficult to get a parliament representing a lot of shades of opinion, given the first past the post system. So,
absolutely.
Actually, for me, I want Brexit to happen. I want some electoral reform to take place in the House of Commons. I think the House of Lords needs to be replaced by an elected Senate, and I do think you're right. I think we need a multiplicity of voices within Parliament representing significant groups right across our society. Jim, great call. Thank you very much. And Jim there, who managed to stay calm whilst a lot of us were getting very passionate about Leave and Remain, Jim rose above the fray and kept out of it. On Twitter I get, the country is crying out for a new party. UKIP is done. It also needs to be more about more than Brexit, as this country is going to pot fast. A complete serious rethink of everything is needed, and none of the present parties give a damn about what's best for the UK or its people. And I think I should say this, that actually, if you look at UKIP's manifesto of 2015, a lot of that now is government policy in a whole host of areas. So UKIP was always about more than just Brexit. It's just that Brexit and border controls were clearly the big, key, salient issues. Stuart says on Facebook, UKIP has been tarnished of late and was seen by many to be slipping in its stances. Full restructure and good marketing may well help. Oh, and someone who stands up and uses simple, direct words to tell the truth and is capable of taking enormous flack that will come thick and fast, day and night. Stuart, you don't need to tell me that. I did it year after year after year. But I think I've just about kept most of my sanity. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. Well, Lord William Hague thinks UKIP should pack its bags and go home because it's done its job, it's changed history, and the Tories are going to deliver Brexit. And interestingly, I'm getting those of you ringing in who are UKIP supporters and leavers saying, no, the job's not done. But I'm also getting people who were either Remainers or didn't vote at all in the referendum saying, actually, it's important in politics to have a range of voices out there, which is interesting. Steve on Facebook says, Rees Mogg should leave the Conservative Party and be the new UKIP leader. Wow, that would be sensationally exciting. And Left of Centre Brexit says, 4 million votes, a mere trifle, like hell it was. Cameron wouldn't have been scared otherwise. Neil in Morden is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Neil.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So what would you say to William Hague, Neil?
I would say that he needs to concentrate on the things that will happen if we stayed in the EU. And they're the things that are worrying me, that not many people realise. Now, Barnier stated he wanted all members of the EU to be in the United States of a European army. Now, I think that would be disastrous because that means that all our troops will be told where to go, when to go and how many troops to send, and we'll have no say in that at all, and that really worries me.
Well, Neil, at the moment, what they're saying, and it's more Juncker really than Barnier, but what they're and by the way, supported everywhere. What they're saying at the moment is they want the European Army, Air Force, and Navy completed by 2025. Exactly how it'll operate, we're not sure. But hey, you're right in saying that's the direction they're going in. Quite.
And the other direction they're going in is they want all European countries that are in the EU to adopt the euro. And we all know that would be totally disastrous for us. But not to mention that, it's about the cost of changing all the machines and minting new coins and the trauma it would be to the older generation who are just getting used to this new money instead of dealing with the old pound, shillings and pence.
Well, it was... Hang on, Neil, it was 1971, I think, wasn't it, when the currency changed? It was a long time ago.
Right.
But do you think, do you think that UKIP or a Eurosceptic replacement is needed to keep pressure on the government? Absolutely
vital. But I think UKIP are in a bit of a state at the moment, and I don't really know if... Rees-Mogg would be a brilliant person to run UKIP, but that's never going to happen, is it? But I do admire him. I do admire his honesty and the calmness of the way he speaks, but he won't come over to UKIP, we know that.
I think he would.
Causing problems.
I think if you cut Jacob Rees-Mogg in half, rather like a stick of rock, he'd have Tory written through the middle. That's my feeling. Neil from Morden, thank you very much indeed for your call. Joseph says, hi Nigel, why don't we stay in the European Union and become the worst member in the group to the point where they want to get rid of us? Oh, come off it. Look, why would you want to stay part of something and be a constant blooming nuisance? I remember Roy Jenkins, saying, late 1990s, that Britain had a choice. Rather than being a constantly foot-dragging, ever-complaining member, either we accept political union or we leave the club. And it was Roy Jenkins that said that, and I thought there was something that was absolutely perfectly logical about that. And my worry now is we voted out, the Prime Minister says she'll take us out, and yet we appear to be opting back in to virtually all of it. And so I think, when Haig says, once Brexit's happened, let's assume we do leave. Let's assume there is no second referendum on membership. He says then, arguing about its details will be academic. Well, I disagree with William Hague. We'll be arguing about these policies and these details for the next 3 or 4 general elections, in my view. Judith is calling from Yeovil. Good evening, Judith.
Yes, hello there, Nigel. I do think there is a need for a pro-Brexit party. Whether UKIP is the one to fill the bill, I'm not so sure. Because the one thing that surprised me when I joined UKIP for a year, about 4 years ago, was that they were not a political fighting organisation. And I'm afraid, it pains me to say this, Nigel, but I'm afraid I blame you for that, because you were leader.
Thank you very much.
And I know you had this national executive that you talked about, but the constitution that came about under your leadership. And it's too late now to form UKIP into the sort of organisation it needs and needed to have been.
The trouble is, Judith, that when you lead something, you have to delegate. Because what you can't do is you can't be the front man. You can't be the guy that's on breakfast television and then speaking in a town public hall till 9:30 in the evening and maybe having a glass of something afterwards, and then 4 or 5 hours in bed, and then doing it all again, living on the road, living as it was for the last few years, necessarily surrounded by security. Such was the unpleasantness being put against me. You can't be out there living that high adrenaline life, trying to sell a message to many millions of people, and at the same time sit in an office with a computer and a pen and paper and plan logistics. You simply... I tell you what, Judith, not only can you not do both...
May I pick you up on that?
But it would be a mistake to try.
That is one of the points I want to make.
Yeah.
I've been involved in politics all my life, since the age of 11. I voted Brexit in the last referendum and the one before that, before Brexit was ever talked about. So it means a lot to me, this. And the one thing, and when I say I was involved in politics all my life, I was for 12 years a professional agent for one of the major parties. And one of the things that surprised me, and I'm not going back in recent years, I'm going back 10, 15 years, I never ever saw anybody on the box. UKIP may well have had a shadow chancellor, a shadow home secretary, a shadow foreign secretary, a shadow works and pensions minister. They may well have had those people in place. I don't know. I never saw them. And that's the point I'm trying to make.
I did try, Judith, to push all sorts of different faces and voices out there. I didn't want UKIP to be seen when I was leading it as a one-man band, but you know what? It was. So, hey, there isn't much I can do about that. Judith, I'm sorry if you were disappointed by the experience. All I would say is that you, in your way, played a part in something that fundamentally changed British politics. What we now have to do is to see it through to its conclusion. William Hague thinks it's going to happen anyway. I'm not so sure. I thank you for your frankness and for your call. Thomas in Worthing is my next caller, and probably my last caller this evening. Thomas, hello.
Good evening. I better make it count then, hadn't I?
Absolutely.
I was going to ring up and say that UKIP needs to grow up. I mean, I'm a member of nearly 4 years. But what I'm actually going to say is what needs to be done to evolve UKIP. Now, you yourself earlier in the show was talking about environmental issues, kind of humanitarian issues, wildlife, that kind of thing. That's very left-wing. That's, very left-wing. UKIP have talked in the last few years about direct democracy.
I don't know. Thomas, why is stopping a devastating fishing method supported by big business, very much in the pockets of big politics? That's not left-wing, is it? It's common sense.
I think it's probably perceptually left-wing. And this is another problem that UKIP have. They're perceived as being a secondary Conservative party, and this is where I think UKIP can actually move forward. What UKIP need to do is need to look at the policies set out by the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, and pick and choose from each of the parties which best serves the people. And, I mean, if you look at the general election that's just passed, it's provable that the votes are very easily movable between the Labour Party and the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So what UKIP needs to do is establish themselves as a party that's separate from the three main establishment parties and takes the best from all of those parties and sets them across.
Thomas, I'm going to disagree with that. I don't think UKIP needs to take sort of, pick and mix, as it were, from the other parties. I think UKIP at its best was coming up with innovative, fresh, new policies and ideas. And you know something? That 2015 manifesto was independently costed by an outside think tank. It's the first time in British politics any political party had ever done that. So I do think, Thomas, that crossing the left-right divide, you're right. Actually, in many ways, UKIP did that because a lot of Labour people voted UKIP certainly in 2015. They did in real numbers. Thomas, UKIP needs fresh thinking. That's what I would put to you.
It needs to change its perception as well, though, because it's so easily defined as being a secondary Conservative party, and you and I both know that they're more than that.
They're more than that. Thomas, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Very interesting. Most of you, nearly all of you tonight, disagreeing fundamentally with William Hague and saying, actually, advocating parties closed down, frankly, is a little bit patronising. There's room for lots of views in public life and in politics, and many of us think that Brexit, actually, to be frank, is far from over. Tomorrow, here in Strasbourg, the Irish Tea Shop will be here. We'll be discussing the Irish border and all things Irish related to Brexit. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage